Hello everyone. Let's start with my experience. Elden Ring is not my first game. I grew up playing the Souls series. I've probably done more challenges in Soulsborne than most popular YouTubers and Twitch streamers. When I was a kid, my father made up a randomizer using dice to randomize our Dark Souls runs. The most difficult run we did was probably on PC using the enemy randomizer to replace all enemies with bosses. The point is, I know Soulsborne, and that is where I'm coming from when I say that Elden Ring is a good game. On a scale of 10, I give it a 7. So for the rest of the video, I will lay out what FromSoft did very well in Elden Ring and the mistakes they made, showing you in-game examples where I can. At the end, I'll share where I rank Elden Ring compared to the other Soulsborne games, and explain why I think Elden Ring is not the best Soulsborne so far. Starting with what FromSoft did right. The first thing on my list is actually not new. They kept the online password system in the game, so if you want to keep this to summon a friend for co-op or PvP, it is easy. This was a major flaw in the earlier games, and when they added it in Bloodborne, it was a move in the right direction. In Elden Ring, they've taken it a step further and added group passwords. The people using these passwords have their messages and bloodstains highlighted for you. And what's more, if someone using the same password as you defeats an Elden Lord, you see a message and get a buff. The next thing I want to mention, and this might be the best improvement they've made to Soulsborne, FromSoft got rid of their ability. Their ability system was bad, and they got rid of it. So that's great. Another welcome improvement is the choices of starting gifts. Keepsakes in Elden Ring have a lot of great choices, but most importantly, there is not one specific choice that stands out as the only good choice. Next up, crafting. I'm sure they had long discussions in the office of what to add in Elden Ring to fill up the enormous world they wanted to create. And this is one of the things they did well. Finding recipes to unlock crafted consumables is a great way to reward exploration. Speaking of the enormous world, Elden Ring is huge. This is by far the largest Soulsborne game, and naturally, it has the most amazing and beautiful scenery, especially the Strawberry Swamp. What's more, the world is almost entirely open. There are very few locks blocking your path. In the beginning, you can travel through 3 major zones without fighting any bosses or finding any keys. After finding 2 keys or defeating just a single boss, another 2 major zones are unlocked to you, and the final major zone is locked behind 2 bosses. The point being, this is an open world, and they did a great job making it that way. Another improvement on the past games was a return to the improvement upon dual wielding. One of the best things that Dark Souls 2 gave us was the ability to not just use two weapons at the same time, but to have a special moveset if the weapons are comparable. In Elden Ring, they took it a step further and removed the weapon stat requirements, so you can dual wield weapons you can't even normally wield. This might be the thing I like the most about Elden Ring. Next, let's talk about PvP. It is a hot topic for some, but it can be one of my favorite aspects of Soulsborne. Invading to me is fun, but when you are totally alone, it really wasn't fair. It wasn't a fair fight to have a surprise human enemy while you also have to fight through hordes of basic enemies. In Elden Ring, they made invasions only possible if you already have a summon. This was a good choice in my opinion. Also, in regards to PvP, the previous games that included it had one major problem. When invading, the gank squads. These people liked to ruin invasions, and in the other games, they were rewarded well for it sometimes. In Elden Ring, they reduced the number of summons to 2, and possibly 1 Blue Phantom if the host has turned it on. This is still a lot to take on for most invaders, but it was an enormous improvement to the 5 or 6 versus 1 we had in some of the previous games. Next up, the Volcano Manor. The quest, though it appears to still be unfinished, was the best story and most fun aspect of the entire game. Speaking of stories, I must mention Ronnie's. My favorite character is Blythe, and although his ending was a bit disappointing, but Ronnie's storyline was overall well written. Finally, the last thing I should mention as a reason why Elden Ring is a good game is the map. They added a map to Soulsborne, but they almost had to. Can you imagine the game without a map? Now let's talk about what they did wrong. Well, where better to start than the map? Teleporting in Soulsborne has usually been about using a consumable or a spell, but in Dark Souls 3 it became more free and you could teleport around the world fairly easily. In Elden Ring, they removed the consumables and spells, and they made it so you can't even open up the map to teleport when in combat. So if you have a single giant mosquito buzzing around your head, you can't teleport. That's annoying. Well, that's just an annoyance, and one that you can deal with in the game. The next mistake is pretty major. The opening cutscene is a picture slideshow. Sure, the art is good, but it isn't the actual world of Elden Ring, or even a cinematic of that world. It's a major flaw when FromSoft clearly had some devs making excellent cinematics throughout the rest of the game. Now, let's talk about the weather. Having a dynamic weather is a big endeavor, but the problem in Elden Ring isn't that the weather changes, it is that it usually doesn't change. When you can't see 2 feet in front of you because of the raging rain or wind storm, or the impenetrable fog, you really find it hard you really find it hard to enjoy the beautiful world that is being blocked from view by this totally unnecessary addition. One of the largest systems they added in Elden Ring could have been the best addition to the game, but they decided to limit spirit ashes into near uselessness. Imagine if this new system had been locked behind a stat, like Arcane, for instance, or if there were an item you had to gather to unlock the ability to summon more than one ash at a time. No! Instead, you're lucky if you can summon one at all. You cannot summon almost everywhere. You cannot use them in co-op or PvP. You can only summon one, and if you take a single step outside the border of these areas, your summon will evaporate. Due to the enormous restrictions someone in charge at FromSoft placed on Spirit Ashes, I have to say, bad job, FromSoft. Next problem. Torrent is only usable in solo. Elden Ring is an enormous world. If you play in co-op, you find that there is a ton of empty space. No enemies, no items, nothing to do but walk around. My guess is that allowing mounts in co-op and PvP would have been an issue for performance, but they should have made it work, because the enormous empty spaces are just boring. Sometimes they would try to fill up the empty spaces between locations with junk loot. That adds to the problem, because now you're exploring. It is often disappointing to find loot, as opposed to becoming rewarded. So you've trodden through the empty space to the next location, only to find a trap. Traps in Elden Ring are everywhere. I'm not talking about pitfalls or dart traps. I'm referring to an extreme effort to slow you down by placing enemies who grab you or try to push you off cliffs everywhere you go. The best example of this effort to slow you down is when they place a large group of slowing moving enemies, near another enemy type that moves faster and can snipe you. This is an unfortunate push for the players to try and move them towards faster and spammier builds or towards ranged and magic. The most egregious mistake in Elden Ring is their tenacity to reuse enemies. It is one thing to find the normal mob enemies everywhere you go, but it's another thing entirely in Elden Ring where the same is true for many of the bosses. The repetition becomes boring and makes the gameplay less replayable. Elden Ring is filled with copies from all the Soulsborne. For the most part, people like the fan service. At the very least, we understand the need to reuse assets in such an enormous game. However, I think we can all agree that the intro boss from Demon Souls, the Vanguard, was used too much. In Elden Ring, they are called Erdtree avatars. There are 7 of the first variant of Erdtree avatars in Elden Ring, and 5 of the putrid variant. That's way too many, but it isn't the only reused boss. There are 6 copies of the Bell-Bearing Hunters, 10 Knights Cavalry, 8 Death or Deathrite Birds, 7 Tree Spirits, and most of the dragons of each other with different elements. Most of the dragons are reskins of each other with different elements. In my opinion, the worst of these violations was the use of Vort from Dark Souls 3, reskinned as the large bears in Elden Ring. If you were wondering why they are such a pain in the butt, it's because they are a boss. Now let's talk about co-op. There are many decisions from FromSoft made in multiplayer that were great, but there are a few where you wonder, why FromSoft? First, we have the not-so-invisible walls. Every time you come across a cave or dungeon in co-op, a transparent barrier prevents you from even taking 2 steps inside to light the grace, let alone exploring the dungeon without unsummoning and resummoning your co-op partner. These walls don't exist just to block underground locations though. If you progress near the borders of any of the zones, you'll find the same transparent barriers blocking your path. Second, you can't summon for co-op if you defeat very specific bosses in each of these walled-in zones. Let's say you want to fight the first dragon later with a friend, so you continue on, and when you think you're ready to fight, you go to summon your friend. If you've already defeated Margit and the first Tibia Mariner, you can't co-op in that zone anymore. Even though you could have all the nighttime bosses, as well as many other world bosses left to fight. There was no reason to limit co-op this way. By doing so, they are not only eliminating the ability to co-op, but also preventing the unintentional invasions. This was a major mistake. Third, if you are trying to control who can invade, or you just want to keep your item upgrade level low, FromSoft wants to take that option away from you. They place 3 items in the game that force you to a higher item upgrade level. The first pre-upgraded weapon you can find is a +7 drop from an NPC. If you don't kill NPCs, you don't have to worry about this one. The second is also in the first zone. Roger will give you a +8 weapon if you progress his quest in the Roundtable Hold. Finally, the third is an item dropped by an NPC invader. You literally have to avoid going to his grace and killing him in order to avoid this one. Getting any of these weapons will automatically bring a person that has never upgraded a weapon into the +7 or +8 category, even though they might not have the upgrade materials to upgrade the weapons they are actually using. This was malicious on FromSoft's part, to say the least. They weren't trying to help you, they were trying to screw you up in co-op and PvP. Finally, the next 4 things are more just pet peeves, and less of an overall bad design. I would have preferred they do a better job, but some people liked these things about FromSoft games. First, failing quests, or just missing NPCs entirely. As you progress, is extremely easy to in FromSoft. If you don't look around everywhere you have ever been, every time you accomplish anything in the game, you will easily miss quests. For instance, I miss speaking to Melania almost every single time she was available to talk to at the Graces, because I had no clue she had anything to say to me. Second, and again, this is just a pet peeve, but I like being able to upgrade my character's gear, and I feel like not being able to upgrade armor is disappointing because FromSoft took the easy way out on bouncing armor. Third, there is trash everywhere, in every gutter, on every street, and especially on top of everything that can be climbed is a trash message. The world is so well made that to see all this trash everywhere is just disappointing. My final complaint would be that they opted out of the designing covenants in Elden Ring. It was a great way to earn progress and rewards, but now most PvP has almost no meaning. You don't need the runes, because if you level up too much, you'll just pass by everyone else. We also lose out on bragging rights of special auras on your red and blue PvP characters. So, here we are at the end of all those complaints and praises. If you got this far, you probably tell that Elden Ring is not my favorite FromSoft game. For exploration, it is the best by default because it has no competition in size. For story, it doesn't beat Bloodborne, which has the best story of these games, but I think it takes a solid second place. For PvP, Elden Ring is possibly only better than Bloodborne, which is the worst for PvP. For variety and builds, it is really hard to say. Balancing isn't finished and there are going to be DLCs, so may have a large variety in the end. However, at the moment of meta is bleed, and 80 to 90% of players are exploiting the overpowered bleed builds, especially in solo runs. So enough talking, here is my tier list of Soulsborne Ring. In last place is Dark Souls 3. Next is Bloodborne. In fourth place is Elden Ring. In third place, Demon Souls. In second is Dark Souls 2. And finally, obviously, my favorite Soulsborne Ring game is Dark Souls 1. Nothing beats the replayability and challenge of the original Dark Souls.